Welcome, I'm Darren, and I'll be your guide today as I look at the early Pacific Prism cards. And this is 1993, 94, and 95, but Pacific Prism was an attempt by the Pacific Trading Card Company to make a high-end card set, and it didn't really work. So there are two chapters where you have the first years, 93 through 95, and then they kind of, in a way, took a break for a few years, and then they made a 99 set and a 2000 set. Because what happened was the 95 set was not reaching the level that they wanted, so they rethought the model, made Dynagon, which was either Prism Dynagon or Dynagon Prism, something like that. And then in 97, I think they just said it was Dynagon. I don't remember how it worked, but that didn't really work, so they took another year off, and then they made another run at Prism for 2 years. But then after that, it still wasn't quite working, so they turned it into Atomic Prism, which was not an atomic or not a Prism card. So Prism never quite worked. And this is the look at the first chapter of Pacific Prism, where they made a set in 93, another in 94, and another in 95. And so we get to see what they were trying to do and why they had to rebuild the model from the ground up in 1996. So Prism started off as an insert set in 1992, specifically two insert sets, one of them in football and then the other one was over in baseball for Nolan Ryan cards. And in football, this was really the place where people saw it and influenced into a set in 1993, because in 93 they only made a football set of Prism. The card in 1992 was a solid prism background with kind of a triangular prism effect, and a picture of the players like it was pasted on, and then a weird comic book effect for the text down below, which is a really cool insert. It's not the greatest insert ever, but a very dynamic, flashy insert that stood out. And then with Nolan Ryan, it was very similar, a little bit different with the Nolan Ryan card, but hey, these were really cool, and so Pacific realized they could use this to make a really high-end brand that people would be really interested in. Only they didn't really think through the whole design component, because in 1993 they released Pacific Prism as their ultra premium brand. And they were not the only company doing ultra premium brands in 93. It was a crowded market instantly overnight. You had Finest, which was the upper tier, super expensive cards. Then you had SP and Select in both football and in baseball. And then in baseball you also had Flair, but in football you also had Pacific Prism. So that was the competition. It was going up against Finest, which is quite some competition, and SP, which was serious competition as well as Select, which in football was an amazing card. And if you look over at baseball, Flair was also a really high tier card. So that meant that Pacific Prism was going against the true big boys. The other companies really knew how, except for Select and baseball, the other companies really knew how to make an ultra premium brand out of the gate. Pacific Prism was more something that was flashy for kids. And so the packs were kind of expensive, but the big problem was it was one card per pack. So if you buy a whole pack and open it up and you get one card, what do you get? Well, you get this. It is essentially the same card as we'd seen in the insert set. It's a big field of Prism and a picture of a player stuck right on it, and then the text down below, which on an individual basis is kind of cool. But when you put it together as a set, well, now it gets to be overpowering, and it just doesn't really work in a way that helps collectors of sets really want to build a set. Because again, you're only getting one per pack, so if you buy a whole box of these, you're only getting a third of the set. You got to buy three boxes and hope for almost no doubles in order to get a complete set of the 100 card set. That's a lot. That really is asking high-end collectors a lot to pursue. This was kind of like in 1989 when Upper Deck made cards that were twice as expensive per pack with less cards per pack and a bigger set with no subsets. It was ridiculous because the odds of getting a high-quality card out of a pack of 89 Upper Deck was very limited. And they were expecting you to pay a lot. Well, here with Prism, they weren't charging the prices of Finest, but still, you're buying one pack to get one card. And the odds of getting a star were very, very, very rare, which meant you had to buy a whole bunch of packs to get anywhere close to feeling satisfied. If you're a team collector, you've got a 1 in 28 chance of getting a card you care about. Those odds are stupid. Pacific really tried too hard, and this card didn't have its own redeeming qualities to make it work. So in 1994, they wanted to continue this trend of making Prism cards, and part of the reason was because they hadn't yet really been embraced by the card market. They weren't quite understood. Nobody knew about them. In 94, you were starting to get the Ben Coates rookie card being discovered, and so they were just starting to be discovered by average collectors. This card set should have been what punched through and grabbed people's attention. It wasn't quite doing it, so they couldn't abandon it, but they had to figure out how to make it work. And so the 1994 card is designed in some ways very differently, but it starts off with one similar component to the previous year, which is that every single card is laid out in alphabetical order, which is a weird choice. But that was the way they set it up, so they weren't building the set in terms of teams because they weren't thinking that way. You don't open up 5 packs of cards, get 5 cards, and think about any sort of a set. You're thinking about this one card is all that matters in my life, and that's the way they designed the set, and that's the way they were thinking. But they also made the set even bigger in 1994. So they were really pushing, assuming that the changes they were making were going to work better. The changes were essentially in twofold. One of them was that there were 2 cards per pack, but not 2 of the Prism cards. I'll get to that in a second. But the other change is that the design on the card was approached in a different way. Instead of being that big single object of prism effect, they created a more intricate effect so that the way that the light plays off of the card is a lot more engaging and a lot more interesting. And whether it was an improvement or less of an improvement, it did make the cards easier to read. They also did a design element down at the bottom that made the card look a little bit better designed, though interestingly on the card back, they got rid of the write-up about the player and they just had a big flashy image on the card back. So they were really having some fun with these cards, but not necessarily really figuring much out as to how to make Prism cards work. But at least they did in 1994 add parallels. So they had a gold parallel of all the regular cards. But these cards were rare enough that there were only 2 per box. But remember, there's only 1 card per pack, and so you're buying a 36-pack box, you're getting 2 parallels of the cards, which means the odds are not as strong as you would see like over in Upper Deck. They were doing gold parallels that were 1 per box, but that was versus 15 or 14 card packs. The thing is, you could buy a pack of tops, and say 1993 tops, 1 per pack, you get a gold parallel card. So that means you get a 15 card pack, 14 regular cards, and 1 gold parallel. To us, that's just like popcorn. No big deal. That's common. You get them all over the place, they're not worth much. The gold parallels in Prism were 1 out of every 18 packs, which means there were 17 silver cards for every gold. But over in Topps in 1993, there were 14 regular cards to every gold. So that means that the ratio of the gold parallels in Prism were similar to what they had been in Topps prior to 1994. And even by 1994, their spectral cards were actually a lot more rare. So the gold parallels for Prism cards were wonderful to pull out of packs, but they didn't have the same rarity that they seem to have because the regular cards were so rare. So everything about Prism just didn't make sense compared to anything else. It's a fun card set, but it's not a great looking card set. It is an overreaching card set for the demand on the hobby, and the parallel, while very rare, it's only rare because the main cards are really rare. So Pacific Prism really was a mess. But I did mention that there were 2 cards per pack because they also had pack filler cards where every single pack also had a normal print card of, well, there are 3 different categories of what you would get. One of them was a helmet card, and this is the actual set that people collected. These cards have not a prism effect, but a print of what kind of looks like a prism background around an artistic rendering of a helmet. And on the card back, it talks a bit about the team. So these really are team cards. But they're not like, you're not going to open one box and get a whole set. They don't have that kind of commonality. In truth, you have to buy 2 or 3 boxes and hope for almost no doubles to complete a set, which means that these cards are actually surprisingly rare. You don't realize that. And on top of that, it's a 30-card set, where in 1994 there were only 28 teams playing, but both the Panthers and the Jaguars were about to be released. And so we didn't have any player cards for either of the teams, but we did have helmet cards that were showing up here and there. And at least with the Carolina Panthers, there was a 93 edge card. I know about that. I don't remember if they had anything Jacksonville Jaguars. But here in 94, these are among the first Panthers and Jaguars cards to show up, and they were a part of this set. But they had other pack fillers that would show up in place of these cards, most notably the checklist cards. And the checklist cards, there are 2 checklist cards, a quarter on the front, quarter on the back, quarter on the front, quarter on the back. So a 2-card set for checklist cards, but each one of these checklist cards also has 2 parallels. There's one with red text, and there's another one with green text, which means there are 6 total cards. There are 2 parallels, or 3 each, of each one of the 2 checklists. But these checklists weren't just showing up here in these packs, because they also showed up in the triple folders packs as well as another pack filler you would run into, which is the Pacific logo card, or an information card. Because in 1994, they still were just being introduced to the hobby, because people were still just discovering the Ben Coates rookie card. And so Pacific really did need to introduce themselves to everybody. And so hopefully these Pacific cards would spread out, and people would pull these information cards out and go, oh, so this is who this Pacific card company is. Not that that matters, except for the fact that the logo cards, which look gorgeous with this black background, well, they also came with a teal background. Oh yeah, and they also had a teal marble background. Oh, and they also had a black marble background as well. So there are actually parallels of this card, which is, I mean, if you're so into collecting that you may care about this, you may care about it. If you don't, it's not a big deal, but there are 4 versions of this card, which does have its own collectability. So they were having a lot of fun with this, but these were also showed up in triple folders. But something else that you would find in triple folders was another version of the main Prism cards, which were numbered differently, which was a 9-card set of just Seattle Seahawks cards. And this is because the Pacific Trading Cards was based in the Seattle area. And so the Seattle Seahawks were the local team. In fact, that's what Pacific Trading Cards cut their teeth on making before they got into making professional cards. So the Seattle Seahawks were the natural company, or the natural team to associate with their promo cards. So they had these promo cards made for the NFL experience. And the cards were also released in triple folders. So it's 9 cards. There is a silver version, and there's also a gold parallel version of each one of those. So if you run into a Seattle Seahawks card that has the NFL Experience logo on the back, or if you run into one that's Steve Largent and you're trying to figure out how that works, these are not part of the main set. These are the parallel set, or the promo set that was not actually available in the Pacific Prism cards. They were released standalone at the NFL Experience, and then also in triple folders. So that was what they did for 1994. And the 94 set they were getting better at this whole thing, but it still wasn't working. And they really did need to figure out how to make this set work, because if this was going to be their flagship, they were up against some serious competition, and they had to completely reconfigure Prism if they were going to make Prism work. And they did that in a couple of different ways. Now, the first way was in terms of how they laid the set out, because they made not just 1 set, but 2 sets. So now they spread it out so they could have a lot more cards, but they could make it at a level that was seemingly more accessible. They're still pretty big sets for a 1 card per pack affair, which means you got to buy a ton of boxes to get it, but the set was now oriented team-wise, so you could really see the set and think in terms of a normal set. But this also meant that the rookies got stuffed at the back of each set, which is a big improvement because in 1993, yes, Drew Bledsoe had a Prism card, but it was somewhere in the set. 1994, yes, Marshall Faulk had a Prism set, but it was somewhere in the set. In 1995, now Steve McNair showed up in a place where it was reliable. So the set was now looking like an actual professional set. Number two, the card was completely reconfigured. Now it's horizontally oriented with text oriented in the opposite direction, which means that whenever you put it in a card page, something still lines up, and then the horizontal also lines up as well. And so there's always the whole way that the card was laid out felt differently, and it felt more designed. They also have two pictures of the players, and instead of having all of the intricacy of the Prism we'd seen before, now they just did a single holofoil back, but they did etching inside of it to make the interest, which makes these cards look and feel more professional, better thought out, and more interesting. And on the card back, they once again brought back a write-up about the player. So now the card it feels more like a real card, not like a true standard card. It's still very distinct, but they were getting into the whole phase of making cards that seemed like they were worth collecting, really pursuing. And every single one of these cards does come with a gold parallel. So the whole set, both Series 1 and Series 2, has the gold parallel. And like I said, they did have rookies at the end of Series 1, but those are just regular players in their college uniforms. Series 2, they did the top draft picks from the draft. And each one of these cards says top draft pick on it. But they're also vertically oriented, which is different from the rest of the set, so they look and they seem a lot more distinct. And that they didn't have a lot of rookies in the two sets, although Antonio Freeman does show up in the set, so that's a big help. And then they do have Jacksonville Jaguars and Carolina Panthers in Series 2. They now had player cards done for it. Series 2 was when they really spent their time making cards for them, because by Series 2, you actually had pictures of the players. But they also did SP cards, 2 SP cards, where they did 1 card for each of the 2 teams. So the Carolina Panthers had managed to pick up Barry Foster, who was a big star at the time, so this was a really big pickup. So they made an SP card that has the whole back is actually red foil. And then they have etching in it, which has a cool spectral effect on the card that makes it really kind of intriguing. And because Barry had not yet shown up on the team to get dressed and have a photo shoot of him in his new uniform, they airbrushed the card in order to make it look like a Carolina Panthers card, which makes it look more like an artistic rendering of him, which makes it kind of weird, but Pacific did that in a lot of their cards, especially in the Gridiron cards. And then for the Jacksonville Jaguars, the big star on that, we didn't know yet that Mark Brunell was going to be a big star, so the big star was draft pick number 2, Tony Baselli, so that's who the other SP card is. But I want to launch into 2 of the insert cards insert sets straight off of this, because they also had a set of Red Hot Rookies, which was draft pick rookie cards done the same way as the SP cards. The red foil on the background, they have the spectral effect. These cards look really awesome. Likewise, they had a Red Hot Stars set, which is the same thing with veteran cards. So those 2 insert sets were among the inserts showing up in these packs. But they did a lot more with inserts and with pack fillers, and that was the third thing I wanted to talk about, is how much they did. You already see that they had a couple of SP cards and 2 insert sets. We're going to get to more of those, but the pack fillers, I got to get to that, which is that you can see that from the pack fillers, they once again did the helmet cards, this time horizontally oriented. The helmets are now drawn, and they have a really cool two color fade between the 2 team colors. And on the back, they have a picture of hardware for NFL players on a grassy field. But they also have, for each team, a picture of the hardware for various NFL teams on a grassy field. And on the back, they have a helmet. So they have 2 versions of each one of these cards. And the write-up on the back is the same, although I noticed when looking at these cards, the font, I don't know if it's the font or something, but the text doesn't entirely line up, which is weird. But they're basically 2 versions of the same cards, almost like a parallel set. But 30 cards, 1 for each team, but they also had Super Bowl logos for all 30 Super Bowls. So every single Super Bowl has a logo on the front, which these look really great. These stand pretty much right alongside the 89 and the 1990 Pro Set logos. But great looking cards. On the back it talks about it, but I mentioned that there are 30 logos, but only 29 Super Bowls had been played because the 30th was going to be coming up at the end of the upcoming season. But they still had the logo for it, or they already had the logo for it and the location and the date, so they put that on the back almost like an advertisement for the upcoming Super Bowl. So that means that there are 3 30-card pack filler sets, 90 cards. It's a lot of packs that you open to complete these sets, but then again, it's a lot of packs you have to open to complete the regular set. So these 3 sets together are almost as hard to get as the main cards in the set, which is really pretty impressive when you think about it, which again, these are pack fillers. Most people blow past them, but there is a pretty good amount of rarity to the cards. But the other thing was there were a lot of inserts that were showing up in packs. And so with those inserts, we had 2 more sets. One of them was called Royal Connections. And this is a card set with a quarterback and a wide receiver. So the quarterback card has half of a logo. It has the team name, or the city that he plays in, and then his name down at the bottom, and then a dark teal background behind him with logos, team logos, spread out around the card. And then there's a corresponding, so that's A, and then there's a corresponding B, which applies to the wide receiver who goes along with it. And you see that there is the other half of the logo, there is the team name, and then of course the quarterback or the player name for the receiver. But this set also comes with a parallel, and the parallel is, it's basically kind of like a blue holofoil. That's really the color that goes along with the parallel. And so every single one of these cards has the parallel as well. So it's a whole, another set to complete for all of these cards. But the last insert set that they created is called Knights of the NFL, and is called Kings of the NFL. And this is a card set of league leaders. Each one of these cards is a really good tight shot of the player, and then kind of not an explosion, but an expansion of a gold holofoil box at the top and at the bottom. And it talks about the statistical the league leading reason that they are showcased on the card. And one card in particular has 2 players because both Marshall Faulk and Natrone Means led the league, or led the AFC in touchdowns. So they share a card, and that one is horizontal. But speaking of Natrone Means, he was the official spokesman for Prism, or for Pacific. And so they made a bunch of promo cards across all of their different brands with Natrone Means. And for this set, they actually did one that looks like a normal card in the set. I mean, it's got a number on the back. Everything about this card seems like it should be in the set, except it doesn't have a straight holofoil. The effect on it is more of a fragmented holofoil, which is very similar to what we would see in Summit, or what we were seeing at Summit in 1995. But this is the only case that one of these cards was done this way, and so that means that this is a card that you may run into and understand this is not part of the set. It's a promo card. That's the difference with this card. That's what makes this card really distinct and why it's different. And that was what brings the 1995 Prism set to a close. Now, unfortunately, this still didn't quite get them where they needed to be. For crying out loud, I collected this set in 96, 97, 98, buying box after box after box. I completed the regular set out of boxes and close to half of the gold set out of boxes. I collected so many of these cards because they were dirt cheap. Nobody bought them. So that's why at the end of 95, they had to completely reconfigure the whole concept of these cards. They did have Crown Royale, which had now taken on the mantle of being a premium brand, or an ultra premium brand, and it was succeeding, so that was something they were able to continue. But for Prism, it just didn't have a place, so that meant that they had to throw it out and wouldn't get back to it until 1999. Now, I'm going to talk about the 99 and 2000 set separately because it's its own little chapter. But this gives you an understanding of how Prism started and what they were creating and why they weren't able to continue past 1995. So, thank you very much for watching the video. If you have any comments about this, let me know, especially in terms of, I'm curious how many of you even knew about these cards in the years when they were being released? Because this was one of those things that not a lot of us experienced, even though it was right there in front of us. So I'm really curious about that. And if you haven't subscribed, I do urge you to do so, and definitely look out for the upcoming video and check out my other videos if you haven't had a chance. And thank you very much for watching.